right, Corvallis, Portland, see, this is great. And people say that Southern Oregon gets ignored, and look at, here we are. You're all coming to us tonight. We love it. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program, The Health Impacts of Gas Appliances. Thank you so much for being here. As I said earlier, my name is Lori Kaplan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm chair of the Ashland Climate Action Project of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now, which is also known as SOCAN. So please note that this program is being recorded, and we will share the link following the program. And then after that, it goes up on the SOCAN YouTube channel and live there forever. So we can keep going back to it as we need to. This program is being held in the ancestral lands of the Shasta, Takelma, Latgawa, and other Native peoples. We are grateful to the elders and their people who cared for these lands. We acknowledge that Native people still live here, and we honor their sovereignty. We're thankful for these lands and the plants and animals that inhabit them and the water that flows through it. Tonight's program is the first of a three-part series on natural gas and home electrification that we are doing in partnership with the Ashland Climate Collaborative. The Collaborative is a newly launched organization designed to serve as a hub for climate action across our community. The Collaborative is being formed because climate action is not just for climate activists anymore. It's for everyone. What I've been saying lately is if you're a human, you have a job to do when it comes to climate action. So the Collaborative will be launching a campaign this spring called Electrify Ashland Now. And you can start learning about the Collaborative at our new website, ashlandclimate.org. And we do have some resources on there about this program, about starting your journey on electrifying your home. Our next Zooms will be on Thursday, March 24th, called Electrify Your Home with Brian Stewart from Electrify Now. And on April 28th, The Future of Natural Gas with Christy Brecken, who is the president of the board for the Citizens Utility Board of Oregon. So I hope you'll join us for that. Many of you know that I frequently rope my husband, Bob Kaplan, into helping me with these programs, and I've done it again. So thank you, Bob. And Bob will be monitoring the chat. And when we get to the Q&A section after our speakers are finished, Bob will be moderating the Q&A. And Bob always makes sure that I don't go off the rails in some way. And he's been doing that for a lifetime, and he's doing a great job so far. So if you have a question, please type it into the chat and Bob will bring it forth at the appropriate time. And I want to thank our colleagues at Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, Sustainable Corvallis, and other community groups for getting the word out about this program and for being part of this journey together where we're all learning how to bring climate solutions home in our communities and learn from each other. So we're very excited about this program in particular. We have an excellent panel for you who have done and are doing a great job in bringing forth important information throughout the Pacific Northwest about the health impacts of methane gas. As you know, methane is a primary component of the fuel we usually call natural gas, and we're using in our homes. A lot of new research is coming out about methane and the extent to which methane gas is entering our atmosphere with harmful impacts to our personal and public health, as well as our climate. And as you know, new research has been published out of Stanford University just in the past few weeks that provides important new information about the extent that our gas appliances are leaking methane even when they're turned off. And all I can say is yikes. I'm really glad we're doing this program. So on that note, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our panelists, Samantha Hernandez, Melanie Platt, Theodora Songas, and Ann Turner. And I believe Samantha is going to start us off. Samantha?
Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha, and I'm a climate justice organizer with the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, also known as OPSR. And we are an organization that works to protect human life from the greatest threats to health and survival. We are an organization of health professionals and public health advocates that are working collaboratively with community partners to educate and advocate for societal and policy change. And I'm so happy to be here with you all tonight and in community with some amazing longtime OPSR volunteers, Melanie, Ann, and Theodora. And I'm going to pass it on to Melanie to start off our very informative presentation.
All right, I'm gonna try to share my screen here. And I think you're not seeing what I'm seeing, but we'll get there in a minute. Are you able to see my presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Melanie Platt. I'm a retired OBGYN physician. I retired in 2016. And one of my daughters, who's now an adult, when she was in college, said she was getting distressed by what she was learning about climate change. This is over a decade ago. And I said to her, oh, don't worry, honey, they won't let that happen. And by the time I retired, I realized that there was no they, and it had to be us who was going to do something about climate change. So that's how I got interested in climate organizing, and I work with 350 PDX and with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. So I'm going to start out with kind of a zoomed out view of all the different ways that methane use impacts our health. So first, a little terminology. If I say gas, I don't mean gasoline. I'm talking about this thing that we use in our homes, which was cleverly branded over 100 years ago as natural gas. It really makes no more sense than saying natural coal. So, we know what natural gas is. It's 90% methane. Methane is a very simple molecule, just one carbon with 4 hydrogen hooks to it. But in many ways, as Lori mentioned, it can be worse than carbon dioxide, even though we hear more about carbon dioxide for global warming. It's also known as methane gas, fracked gas, fossil gas. Messaging studies suggest that for the general public, we should use the term methane gas. It's kind of got a negative chemical-like connotation, but doesn't bring up the political issues when you say fracked or fossil gas. Or you can just say natural gas, but always use it with the scare quotes around it. So in this presentation, I'm going to cover just briefly all 5 of these pathways by which fracked gas affects our health. And many of these are things that you already know about. I'm speaking to the choir here, I know, but just want to be sure we're all on the same page. So if you're like me, you may still have natural gas for heating in your furnace, and maybe you're cooking with natural gas, and until recently, you've never given it much thought. But just like with lead paint, there are things we once thought were safe and maybe even virtuous, but we now know they damage both the climate and our health. When you burn methane indoors, it produces waste products such as nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and formaldehyde. And you're going to get a real crash course in all of this when Theodora talks later in detail about the evidence that these things are harmful to our health. Now, of course, when you burn methane in your furnace or your water heater, those are vented to the outdoors. Although if your system isn't set up right, some of those combustion products can end up indoors. But even if they're vented correctly, they cause significant outdoor pollution. There was a study from California which showed that the nitrogen oxide pollution created by home and commercial buildings burning gas far exceeded the amount from gas power plants. So just because it's not inside our homes doesn't mean that it's good for us. And then explosions. This is a picture of a 2016 gas explosion in Northwest Portland, which injured 8 people and caused more than $17 million in property damage. These explosions aren't common, but they also aren't rare, and you hear about them occasionally. And then, of course, as you all know, there's climate change. Recently, 2,000 medical journals co-published an editorial saying that climate change is the greatest threat to global health in existence today. So let's take a little step back. Where does natural gas come from? Originally, it was an unwanted byproduct of traditional oil fields, but now overwhelmingly it comes from fracking. And Anne's going to cover in more detail the environmental, health, and justice issues that are associated with fracking. This frack gas basically goes two places. One is piped directly into our homes through a large network of pipes under the streets, and we'll talk more about this in a minute. Secondly, it's used to make electricity. Overall, right now, about 25% of the electricity in Oregon comes from frack gas. And electricity generation is where this concept of gas being cleaner than coal came from. And it is true that when you burn methane gas, it creates half the carbon dioxide that you get when you burn coal. But due to the methane leakage all along the pathway from the fracking sites to the pipes to your homes, it causes as much, if not more, global warming than coal. And it's kind of a good news, bad news story. First, the bad, pound for pound, over 20 years, methane pollution is 80 times more potent than warming the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And you've probably noticed that it's in the news a lot these days. A recent UN report said that if we cut methane, we should cut it by 45% this decade because it's the strongest lever that we have to slow climate change over the next 25 years. Another piece of bad news, methane levels are soaring. But the good news is because it has a short half-life, we can control much of the methane that leaks from the extraction and transport of gas. You may have seen the recent headlines that methane leakage from these sites far exceeds what was previously known. And then this is a reference to the Stanford study that Lori mentioned, where it was found that our stoves leak significant methane, enough to have a climate effect of 500,000 cars. And it is rather frightening that 3/4 of it leaks even when the stove is turned off. And this was new stoves, old stoves, expensive stoves, all of the stoves leak significant methane. So if it's so bad, why do we keep using it? Well, the gas industry has been very effective in selling us gas appliances, especially gas stoves. And your friends are like mine. Most of them will say they love their gas stoves. Professional chefs and social media influencers have all been paid to help us love burning methane indoors, which is what we're doing. In retrospect, seems like kind of a crazy idea. As you can imagine, the more information there is about the downsides of fossil fuels, the gas industry realizes that it's in the fight of their lives. So I'd like to take a minute to immunize you against some of their greenwashing efforts. Specifically, they try to convince us that they can make natural gas clean. And Northwest Natural, I don't know, do you guys have Northwest Natural down here in Ashland, or are you on a different gas provider?
We have a Vista.
We have a Vista.
You have a Vista, yeah, okay. So this is a little bit about Northwest Natural, but I imagine a Vista has pretty much the same concept. So Northwest Natural has a sophisticated advertising campaign that involves lots of pretty pictures of families and cows and daisies. It's called Less We Can, and it's trying to promote renewable natural gas as the solution as to how they can decarbonize, quote, decarbonize the gas supply. And what is RNG? Well, basically any carbon-based product which rots under anaerobic conditions, meaning with no oxygen. So think of a landfill rather than a compost, creates methane. And any kind of poop, so sewers or sewage treatment plants or industrial farming, it can all be rotted, purified, and then used as biomethane. So it kind of seems like it's a good idea, right? You're using this stuff that nobody wants and you're making something out of it. But the problem is it's still methane. It's just biomethane. And when you burn it, it produces carbon dioxide. And when you use it, it leaks in all the same way. If you look at the full life cycle of biomethane, it avoids only about half the warming effect of fossil methane. It's also very expensive. There's only enough to replace about 20% of the natural gas that's used in Oregon. And so it locks us into decades of fossil gas use. And there are perverse incentives. If you're going to rely on factory farms and landfills to get your energy supply, then you need even more factory farms and landfills. In addition, it's not clear if at this point there's even a single molecule of RNG in the current Northwest natural gas supply. Now, RNG may have a role to play in some of the hard to decarbonize sectors, marine, aviation, steel, but clearly we shouldn't use it for our homes where we have a better alternative. Another alternative that the gas industry sometimes touts is hydrogen, especially green hydrogen, which is produced by leftover renewably generated electricity. And there are problems with hydrogen. It's extremely explosive, it's very leaky, and you can only mix a small percentage of it with methane gas as it corrodes normal pipes. So again, it might be useful in the future as a form of energy storage when the sun isn't shining, but it certainly should not be used in our homes. And that's the bottom line here, is that both of these supposed solutions, biomethane and hydrogen, shouldn't be seen as a replacement for electrification. The experts agree, and I'm really glad to see that popular culture is starting to catch on that electrification is the best solution. This is from a Samantha Bee piece, and Jonathan Scott of the Property Brothers recently had a little thing promoting induction stoves. So we don't want to dig our hole any deeper than it already is, which means no new fossil fuel infrastructure. That means no new gas plants, no new gas pipes, and no new gas appliances, stoves, furnaces, and water heaters. So here's a three-part strategy for actions that we can take. Samantha's going to talk in a minute about immediate things you can do personally to decrease your risk from your existing gas appliances. Secondly, if you can, don't buy any new gas appliances. You want to replace your stove, your gas water heater, and your furnaces when you can. And just a little point to make, it's preferable to do this before they actually die, so it isn't an emergency, because sometimes you have to have an electrician in or do some research, or it can take a little while. So the perfect time to replace your appliances is just before they die, if you can figure that out. And then third, and probably most importantly, we want to advocate for policies which makes these things easier for everyone else to do. Examples of policies are new construction should be fossil fuel. We should make it easier to electrify existing homes, and we should help low-income folks electrify first, not last. One important point is that many low-income folks already bear the largest health burden, and they will benefit most from what is often called beneficial electrification. Maybe you've heard of the Energy Trust of Oregon. They've had some rules that have prevented them from advertising the fact that they can give you a little bit of money to replace your furnace with a heat pump. Those are fuel switching rules. But we think that some of our public pressure may have worked, because they've recently changed their website to actually make it a little more obvious that there are monies available to somewhat help subsidize that electric replacement. So if we want to get rid of the fuel switching rules, improve the incentives for electrification, and put frontline communities at the front of the line, we'll have to work together, because we want to make it easy to do the right thing. So there's a bunch of different groups like yours, and there are also coalitions. We have one in Portland that the people in this presentation are part of. It's called the Gas Busters. It's mostly Portland focused, but if anybody from Ashland wanted to be a representative to their group, from their group to the Gas Busters, you would be welcome. I was really glad to hear that Brian Stewart from Electrify Now is going to be talking to you. He's part of our Gas Busters group here, and their website has lots of good information about electrifying, and they also run fabulous webinars. And then I just want to do a shout out for this methane report that Anne and Theodora and I worked on. You can find it if you Google Power Pass Frack Gas Methane Report. And we're using it specifically with elected officials. It's a 62-page report. We do have a short 2-pager that I could also share with you. But when you're working with elected officials, it's nice to have some piece of paper in your hand. So I think I am done here and I'm going to pass it on. Anne, are you next or is it Theodora?
It's Theodora.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it on to Theodora.
I'm gonna share my screen right now.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, hi, I'm Dr. Theodora Songas. I'm an environmental health scientist and an epidemiologist with a career in public health. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the information we have on the health effects associated with gas appliances. Go to the next slide, please. It's been well demonstrated that the pollutants emitted by gas burning stoves and ovens in residential homes are harmful to the health of children, the elderly, persons with underlying health conditions, and underserved minority and low-income communities. And this was shown by 2 recent comprehensive reviews, one at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health, and one by Rocky Mountain Institute, Mothers Out Front, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the Sierra Club. Next slide, please. Gas appliances in the home, especially gas stoves, generate a number of harmful pollutants, including nitrogen oxides, fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, sulfur dioxide, and methane. Gas stoves and ovens pollute indoor air, and gas furnaces, water heaters, and clothes dryers usually vented outside. Hopefully they're vented well. They pollute outdoor air. There are no US standards to restrict indoor air pollutants. And gas stoves and ovens emit nitrogen dioxide into indoor air at levels that would be illegal outdoors by US EPA air quality standards. In 2015, over a third of Americans cooked with gas, and that exposed them to between 50% and 400% higher levels of nitrogen dioxide than those who cook with electric stoves. On average, people in the US spend 90% of their time indoors, and it's possibly more for children, the elderly, and those living in low-income, poor neighborhoods. So their exposures can be quite significant. Next slide, please. So it's no surprise then that gas stoves have been associated with a number of health issues in multiple studies, particularly for children who are at greater risk from air pollutants because they have faster breathing rates, higher lung to body ratios, higher activity levels, and they have developing immune systems. In a 1992 study, Hasselblad and co-workers examined 11 different studies in different settings to see what was consistent in findings among those studies, and found that children exposed to a long-term increase of 15 parts per million of nitrogen dioxide indoors have a 20% increased risk of respiratory illness. A few years later, a study was done that analyzed 41 studies and found children that reside in homes with gas stoves have a 42% increased risk of experiencing asthma symptoms or current asthma, and 24% higher lifetime risk of asthma than children who live in homes with electric stoves. And that confirmed Hasselblad's findings. Furthermore, they found quantitative evidence that gas cooking increases the risk of asthma and current wheeze in children as indoor levels of nitrogen dioxide increase. Further studies have confirmed the negative health effects of residential gas appliances regarding asthma in children. Bellinger and coworkers found that asthmatic children exposed to nitrogen dioxide indoors are at a dose-dependent increased risk for asthma morbidity as measured by looking at asthma severity score, wheeze, night symptoms, and rescue medication use. Next slide, please. Okay. In children also, cooking with gas reduces lung function up to 3.4% in children. In a study that used in-home exposure measurements, pediatric asthma patients have a higher frequency of acute, that is, spiking nitrogen dioxide exposures, and those were associated with hospital admissions more frequently than those who lived in houses without gas stoves. So we have to remember that, importantly, that asthma is the #1 chronic disease in children. In the general population, nitrogen dioxide exposure increases the risk of all-cause mortality, especially in persons with pre-existing conditions. Nitrogen dioxide exposure increases the risk of lung and breast cancer and adverse pregnancy outcomes, including low birth weight. And in young adults, it was found that cooking with gas leads to increased risk of reduced lung function. Next slide, please. So we'll move on to another one of the pollutants produced by burning gas in your home, and that is particulate matter, or PM2.5, the fine particulate matter. Exposure to PM2.5 increases blood pressure, risk of stroke, risk of premature mortality, bronchitis, asthma onset and exacerbation, low birth weight, and preterm birth. And gas stoves and ovens produce twice as much particulate matter, including the fine particulate matter, as electric cooking. Another study looked at exposure to PM2.5 and nitrogen dioxide together. As we know, none of these pollutants exist in isolation. There are several things that are being emitted at the same time, and they tend to interact and can exacerbate health conditions. And exposure to PM2.5 and NO2 was associated with increased COVID-19 susceptibility in one study, and also potentially increased disease severity and transmissibility. In addition, in a study that looked at multiple longitudinal cohort studies, they found that PM2.5 and nitrogen oxides exposure increased the risk of dementia. Okay, I'd like to go on to carbon monoxide. There are many groups of people that are very sensitive to the effects of carbon monoxide, including the elderly, the fetus, children, and persons with cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases. And it's important that we understand the tissues that need the highest amount of oxygen, that is the heart, the brain, and exercising muscle, are the first to be affected by the effects of carbon monoxide. Exposure during pregnancy increases the risk of low birth weight. Carbon monoxide exposure can exacerbate asthma, Chronic exposure increases risk of dementia and congestive heart failure. People with coronary artery disease are vulnerable to low levels of carbon monoxide, and there's no safe level of exposure to carbon monoxide. And at high levels, it causes death by asphyxiation. Next slide. Formaldehyde is the last of the chemicals emitted by burning gas in homes, and that is, and formaldehyde is a known carcinogen and a lung and skin irritant. So you're seeing that many of these emissions are associated with lung problems. But that's not all. Okay, and there's no safe level of exposure to formaldehyde because it is a carcinogen. In short, the scientific evidence indicates that urgent action is needed to reduce exposure to the products of combustion of methane gas in order to prevent what we cannot cure. Thank you, and I'll hand it off to Samantha.
So next, we are going to have Ann Turner speak about the environmental justice concerns relative to the health impacts of gas appliances.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thanks for so many of you being here tonight. My name is Ann Turner. I'm a retired physician, and I spent my career working at a community health center, well, a couple of community health centers, but in Oregon at Virginia Garcia Memorial Health Center. And this working there is really what led me to feel this passion around environmental justice, as well as, of course, the climate effects that so disproportionately affect minority populations. And I'm a member of and a volunteer with Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, and also with 350 PDX. And tonight we'll talk about the environmental justice concerns around gas, and all of the appliances, but also the full life cycle. So next slide, Samantha. So environmental justice, what is it? Well, the EPA defines it as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all peoples, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations and policies. But I also have become aware that there are definitions of environmental justice that are broader, that include, and I think it's particularly relevant with gas and really all of the fossil fuels, that it should also include children, older individuals, and people living in rural settings. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we really can't talk about environmental justice without talking about the full life cycle of gas that, as Melanie mentioned, really begins with fracking. But it's also a significant issue with the gas power plants that generate our electricity and are located in counties and communities that have significant disparities. And thirdly, of course, the gas that's piped into our homes. Next slide. So a little bit about fracking. So about 3/4 of the gas that we use in Oregon is fracked. And these fracking wells are sited and located in low wealth minority neighborhoods near residences, schools, and playgrounds, or on or near tribal lands most commonly. And hydraulic fracturing contaminates our air, groundwater, and soil by injecting these toxic chemicals into the ground. And this results in communities living near these wells having increased rates of cancer, birth defects, and asthma. Fracking also causes earthquakes, and it depletes the local water supply because it requires so much water to do the fracking. Next slide. And these operations, so this is you can see a fracking well near a school and a playground in Colorado. And to create these wells, they often use, the extractive industries often use temporary labor camps, next slide, as their primary source for workers. And these temporary labor camps, sometimes called man camps, they place an incredible burden on the local infrastructure, on the police and other community resources, including public health. They're associated with increased rates of crime, motor vehicle accidents, sexually transmitted diseases, and even HIV/AIDS. And tragically, it also has resulted in increased rates of sexual assault and death among Native American women. And for those of you in Southern Oregon, you probably, I'm sure you remember the possibility of building the Jordan Cove LNG terminal, and that that terminal had already planned to have a labor camp associated with it. And so that would have, I think, posed yet another risk for that community. Next slide. So in terms of gas power plants, so there are 6 in Oregon, and they power, well, Melanie said about 25%. So somewhere in that range of the amount of power that's generated from these power plants to supply our electricity. But they're also Oregon's top polluters. They're located in counties with significant minorities and health disparities. 2 are in Morrow County and 2 in Umatilla, 1 in Klamath, and the last is in Columbia. Next slide. And you can see from this next slide that these communities, which are all rural, have 3 of the 4 have significantly higher populations of Latinx people, as well as Native Americans. And their health outcomes, as determined by the Robert Wood Johnson County Health Ranking System, it shows that 3 of the 4 counties have poor health outcomes, and that means quality of life and length of life is reduced, as well as 3 of the 4 are in the lower quartile for what are called health factors. And these are things like access to medical care and the social, economic, and physical environment. Next slide. So around this issue of gas power plants, there is, as we know, good news and bad news. The good news was in the last full legislative session, the passage of House Bill 2021, 100% clean energy for all, that assures that our electrical grid will be powered by clean, renewable sources, primarily wind and solar, and not nuclear, 100% by 2040 and 80% by 2030. But the bad news is that these gas power plants will still continue to operate and without any regulation. So in December, the EQC approved DEQ's climate protection program, which was a good thing overall. And the program was actually strengthened from its beginning plan by DEQ after literally thousands of Oregonians submitting comments. And they did strengthen the program, but they did not succeed in convincing the DEQ to regulate the 6 gas power plants. So these power plants, besides supplying our electrical grid with energy, they also sell methane directly to private non-utility buyers. So these communities will continue to be exposed to pollution and its subsequent impacts on their health. Next slide. So finally, what about gas in our homes, air pollution, and environmental justice? Well, as Theodore and Melanie mentioned, gas appliances that are vented outside, furnaces, water heaters, and clothes dryers pollute our outdoor air. And we know that air pollution worldwide is primarily due to fossil fuel emissions. This accounted to almost 1 in 5 deaths in 2018 and is associated with an increased risk of death, increased rates of death actually from COVID-19, and disproportionately impacts environmental justice communities. According to the 2018 Oregon Report on Climate Change and Public Health, BIPOC, low-income and low-wealth communities are disproportionately impacted by exposure to air pollution. And it results in increased rates of death for 4 of the 5 most common illnesses in Oregon: heart disease, stroke, respiratory diseases, and cancer. Next slide. So there isn't really, it's really hard to come by data that quantifies the air pollutants vented outdoors, but the San Francisco Bay Area Quality District, you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, measured the nitrogen oxide emissions from residential gas combustion versus passenger vehicles, and found that it was actually higher than passenger vehicles. So that really, I think, puts in perspective the fact that this is really a significant cause of air pollution. Of course, the CO2 emissions were about double with passenger vehicles, but the nitrogen oxide emissions were significantly higher from passenger vehicles. The next slide. So the World Health Organization and scientific research supports the conclusion that there are significant racial, ethnic, and income disparities in asthma rates, with populations of color and people in poverty experiencing higher asthma prevalence rates and poor asthma outcomes compared with the general population. So for this reason, asthma is a particularly important health equity indicator. The next slide. So I don't have information for Southern Oregon, but in Multnomah County, the rate of asthma is 10%, and overall in Oregon, it's 11%. However, if you're low income and earn less than $20,000 per year, or you're on the Oregon Health Plan, the rate of asthma is somewhere between 14 and 25% if you live in Multnomah County. And there are higher percentage of ethnic minorities live in census tracts with higher levels of air pollution and higher rates of asthma. So there is a strong correlation between air pollution and asthma and being an environmental justice community. Next slide. So as we heard from Theodore, gas stoves and ovens pollute our indoor air and impact environmental justice communities more seriously. Next slide. And severely. So these communities, people in these communities are much more likely to be renters. And as such, they really have no control over their appliances. often their appliances are poorly maintained. They have stoves and ovens that are not properly vented. Sometimes they don't really have a hood. And they may have, being in a smaller place, they may have fewer windows to open. They're likely living in smaller spaces so that the concentration of these pollutants is higher. And if they're living in crowded conditions, then it's likely that stoves and ovens are being used more frequently, resulting in more pollution. And then they live in neighborhoods with polluted outdoor air. So on that sad note, what can we do about that, Samantha?
Thank you, Anne. Yeah,
Thank you.
there are many things that you can do. Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Hernandez, and I'm a climate justice organizer. And I'm going to be speaking about how you can protect your health from gas stove pollution. And so just to give a really brief summary about how gas stoves affect your health, like Theodora spoke, indoor air is largely unregulated in the United States and is often more polluted than outdoor air. Gas stoves can be a large source of toxic pollutants indoors. The methane and the nitrogen dioxide emissions that Theodora talked about. Indoor pollution from gas stoves can sometimes reach levels that would be illegal outdoors. And as Theodora mentioned, there are well-documented risks and various studies that show the negative health impacts from gas stove pollution and to people's respiratory health. And so I'm going to really quickly go over some harm reduction strategies and budget-friendly ways to protect your health from gas stove pollution. And so the two main things that I'm going to go over is ventilation and using electric appliances. So, if you have a gas stove and you are cooking, you want to make sure that you ventilate your space very well, either by opening a window while cooking or using your exhaust hood / vent hood while cooking. And it's important that if you are cooking, to try to use your back burners, because your back burners sit directly under your vent hood. And what your vent hood does is it captures the fumes and vents them outside. And this is especially important if you live in a very confined space. So, when you're burning fuel in a more confined space, there's more of a concentration of these pollutants. And another thing to keep in mind to reduce those health impacts is to use electric appliances that you might already have, like microwaves, toaster ovens, rice cookers, crock pots, portable single induction burners, electric tea kettles, heat plates. And just to note that electric stoves are also really good for cooking. So if you have an electric stove, that's awesome. And I think using these electric appliances are very helpful during climate disasters. So, during cases of wildfire or winter storms, especially during wildfires, because you don't want to do anything that will emit more particulate matter or more pollutants in your home. And so having using electric appliances is very beneficial to your health, especially for people who can't afford to buy an induction stove in the immediate future. And really quickly, I just wanted to go over induction stoves and what they are. So this is a little video showing a little example of how they look and how they work. So underneath the glass, there are a coil of electromagnetic cables. And when the stove is turned on, there is an electric current that runs through these coils, and it creates a magnetic field. And so that's how induction stoves work. That magnetic field is what heats the pots and pans through what is known as magnetic induction. And this is just a little explainer from Alex Dos Diaz from the Spruce. One thing to note is that if you are considering buying an induction stove, you might require certain cookware that is compatible with your induction stove. And this infographic is really helpful in breaking down what you can use and what you can use. So for example, cast iron, enameled cast iron, stainless steel, not all copper. And yes. And so like I previously mentioned, these are just some things to consider if you are thinking about getting an induction stove. It can be costly, and especially if you do have to buy and spend money on cookware, which can also be quite expensive. And so I briefly wanted to talk about why having this conversation is so important. We are living in unprecedented times of compounding climate disasters. And, unfortunately, it seems like the burden is placed on the individual to protect their health. Our government should be doing more. Our power grid should be more resilient, and our infrastructure should be better maintained and better built to be climate resilient. And the government, our local governments, should be better prepared for the increasing chaos of climate change fueled weather events. And so I am just, wanted to be transparent about that and just say that, these are just short-term solutions and immediate ways that you can protect your health, but definitely more should be done to be protecting people's health. And I also wanted to briefly talk about the importance of policy and focusing on the long-term solutions. I'm sure you've all heard about the various gas bans that are going around, that are happening all over the country, particularly in New York City, Berkeley, California, San Francisco, California, Sacramento, California, Eugene, Oregon. There is a lot of momentum for gas bans happening at the local city, and also in cities like New York and Portland. It's important that we focus on phasing out fossil fuels and gas-powered appliances that we transition to an electric grid that runs on carbon-free power. It's important to consider that carbon emissions from buildings are a major driver of climate change. 13% of US greenhouse gas emissions come from commercial and residential buildings. And as I mentioned, New York City recently agreed to phase out fossil fuels in all new building construction, but New York gets most of its power from a local grid, and that grid gets 85% of its energy from fossil fuels. And so, we have to think, short term and also long term, and also do what we can while we're here. And, some good local state news is that Eugene, Oregon is developing an ordinance that would require all new buildings to be electric. So again, there is a lot of momentum for gas bans all over the country. And it's just really exciting times to be doing this type of work. And with that, I'm going to end our presentation and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Samantha. That was fabulous. And all of our speakers, thank you so much. And now I think I'm going to turn it over to Bob to moderate our questions, and please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And we've got quite a few already. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody. So we did get some questions already in the chat. Now, what I'll do is I'll read them and see if anyone from our panelists wants to talk to them. So the first question came from Eric. He wants to know if there's a way to pressure the gas utilities to account for their energy mix. For example, their fossil gas versus biomethane. This, I think, goes to Melanie's comment about the difficulties.
I think at the time of, when they have to go through the regulatory process, that information is probably made public as part of that. But basically there is almost no renewable natural gas or biomethane in the pipes right now. When they say that they are gonna do it, it's all sort of hypothetical and in the future. And what they're really buying is the ability to say they have bought some biomethane, let's say in Nebraska. Often it's not even locally sourced and it's not coming here. It's kind of like renewable energy credits, if you're familiar with that concept. So, at most in 10 years, we could be at 4 or 5% of biomethane in our pipes. And that's not going to get us anywhere where we need to be. And once again, remember that biomethane is still methane. It has all the problems with leakage and all the climate issues. It's not a solution.
Thanks. And also the health impacts that we're talking tonight about indoor air quality. So biomethane still has the same indoor air quality.
Exactly the same issues. Yes.
Okay. So Anita asked the question, what about propane? Does it have the same general impacts on health as methane?
Theodora, do you know anything about propane? I don't.
All I remember is a long time ago we were worrying about Portland having a propane plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we were mostly worried about the explosion potential and
mm-hmm.
and having another fossil fuel facility in Portland. So, wow, I would assume that if you're burning something and it's propane is a fossil fuel, it's not that different from methane, I guess. But I haven't looked for health effects data on propane, like propane stoves that people use. So
Thanks for asking that question. It'll
Yeah.
spur us to look into it.
Right. Good. So John asked, isn't all the methane burned in the stove or the heaters, or does some, when it's burning, not when it's actually leaking from the stove that's turned off, but when it's burning, does some still escape, some methane still escape into the atmosphere?
Yes, it does. The Stanford study found that a quarter of the methane that leaked from stoves occurred when they were turned on. So clearly there is methane that is leaking during the burning process. It may be at the initial ignition time, or it could be during the actual burning, but there's never going to be 100% combustion.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. And we've got a long question. Let's see. Help me understand why the decorative behind glass fireplaces aren't addressed in talks about gas appliances. So we always talk about, gas appliances being stoves and water heaters and furnaces. What about those gas insert fireplaces that people like?
If they're vented outside, they would be working like a furnace.
Right.
And
Okay.
they also have to be very well insulated so that they are being vented to the outdoors, so that they're not contributing to the pollution inside the house.
Inside the house, but then they still have the same impacts outdoors, just as the furnace and other things. Great. Okay, we have a
Burning.
comment from burning. Yeah, we have a comment about propane from Dermot McGuire. Propane is a byproduct of petrochemical refining, and regardless of its direct health effects, which are likely similar to methane, propane is part of the fossil fuel problem. So that's thanks, Dermot. That's all the questions we have right now. Any other questions, Linda? Let's see. What government processes are being developed to deal with improved infrastructure for increased electric use as we wean ourselves off gas? Do any of our speakers know about that?
Is that a question about us needing more electricity, or what is that question?
It is.
Yeah,
I think it is, yes.
So yeah, some people have expressed the concern that, gosh, if we're all electric, we're going to need a lot more ability to produce more electricity. And all I can say, and this is a line I think that Brian Stewart had, is I wish we had that problem today. The transition away from methane is not going to happen overnight. And we are going to be able to increase our electricity generation, especially with renewables, over that time. It's going to be a process that occurs over the next few decades. So it's not like we're going to, all of a sudden need to have all that additional electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've seen some studies that suggest that as we are electrifying, we're also improving the energy efficiency of our electric, items. And you can see that we can see that on our own house, that as we electrified, we actually reduced our total energy consumption because we replaced much more efficient. So, Ruth, we've got a hand up from Ruth, who maybe wants to ask her own question rather than have me bungle it.
Oh,
But she has to unmute first if she wants to.
I think you're doing a great job, Bob. You're not bungling me. We can let Ruth talk too.
We can.
just the
Ruth, can you unmute yourself?
I guess I live in a different area than most of you. I live in Lane County, and we burn wood for electricity. And it puts out a lot more carbon than natural gas. But I still don't want natural gas.
Yeah.
So we're very concerned about any change for us. But the timber, we have so much timber and so much wood being burned. We have about 8 or 9 companies I know of that burn wood for their energy. And they produce a great deal of high carbon, very high carbon, plus a lot of particulate, which makes it even worse for breathing, and very bad for young people. When I go in the area, the kids all have asthma. It seems like they're all smoking, and it's really terrible. And they just stopped. 350 worked very hard and got Baxter to stop. which was a company that burned wood. But it only burned a small amount compared to the utilities and many of the other companies, just a very small amount. So we really need to proceed and see that wood is not burned for our energy source anywhere. It's much worse than carbon, much worse than natural gas. So it's something you could all think of, but you're very lucky if you don't have it in your area.
Yeah, I've heard a good description of sort of what's gone on with humanity over the last few centuries. You've heard it called the Anthropocene, but the term that I like is the Pyrocene, where we burned everything. We burned wood, we burned gas, we burned oil, and all of these things, when we burn them, are bad for us. And we have to get away from the idea that we're going to get energy from burning things. So, and also, of course, that sort of leads to the fact that climate change is making the forests burn down. It's another way to think of this as being the Pyrocene. So for me, it's a helpful way of thinking about all the things we need to stop doing. We need to stop burning everything. Thanks, Ruth, for that comment.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question about induction stoves, induction cooktops, and the Martha and Peter observed that non-magnetic pots and pans can be used with induction cooking with a product that is a stainless steel disc with a handle that is placed between the cooktop and the pan so that it will heat the pan. Does anybody have any experience with those to see if to know that they actually work? I guess is the question.
I have read about that. My induction stove, which I had installed 10 days ago, came with an instruction in the manual to not use any product between your pot and the stove. But I have no experience. Anyone else have experience?
Not with that, no.
Intriguing.
Yeah, and when we first got our induction stove, we were concerned about scratching the glass, so we put paper towels on between the pot and the glass, and that lasted for about a week, and then we just kind of went with the glass. Never had a problem. We've had an induction stove now for, I guess, almost 2 years with never a problem. My sister has had one for 10 years in North Carolina, and she's never had a problem scratching it. Let's see. A good question from Mary saying that you mentioned top chefs were being used by the gas industry to sell gas stoves. Are more chefs starting to change their story now that gas is not so good?
There are a handful of chefs who are promoting induction stoves, and you can find them on the web. I've heard induction stoves being described as the Tesla of home electrification, because if you buy a Tesla or some fancy electric car, everyone can see you got this fancy new shiny thing. But if you get a heat pump, it's not very exciting to get people to come into your home and show them your heat pump.
No.
The induction stove is the one thing that can you can show other people and say, isn't this cool? So I'm hoping that more chefs will bring it up. Induction stoves are safer and any electric stove really, but especially induction, because the cooktop itself doesn't get as hot, are safer for the elderly, for people with disabilities, for children, and safer for chefs. Chefs get a lot of burns and also suffer from the heat and the pollution from combustion of the gas stove. So I'm hoping that more commercial cooks and chefs will jump on the induction bandwagon. It's a little slow. People are used to a certain way of doing things, and it takes them a while.
Right.
I found if you do a Google search for Michelin chefs, induction stoves, you do find quite a few there that are saying good things about it. And also, I'm from Hyde Park, New York, where the Culinary Institute of America is. And I was thinking, well, what do they say? And they say that they train all of their top chefs on both now.
Oh, that's great.
Not as a political statement, but as a readiness statement that their chefs need to be able to work in both environments. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah,
That is great.
Yeah,
And I'd heard that. Go ahead.
No, you can go, Bob.
Well, I was just wanting to mention that I'd heard that about worker safety for chefs in terms of burns, but listening to this presentation made me think about the pollutants as well, that, with burning all those gas 6 or 8 or dozen 15 cooktops going on, and they're not getting all vented out. So there's got to be health effects, the respiratory effects on chefs as well. Samantha, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say really quickly that the Great British Baking Show is a show where there are some contestants that do a baking competition, and they actually all use induction stovetops. And also there's a famous TikToker by the name of John Kung, who is a Detroit-based chef, and he's been speaking a lot about the health benefits of induction stovetops, and was actually hired by Mothers Out Front, who were one of the groups that did that famous health impacts of gas stoves report, along with Physicians for Social Responsibility. So he was hired by Mothers Out Front to do promotional ads about the benefits of induction stove tops. So if you want to look him up on TikTok, his name is John Kung, and I can put it in the chat.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Samantha. Amelia has a question about whether Oregon has any rental regulations that require landlords to provide stoves, heaters, ventilation in proper working condition. And are there no regulations that require appliances to work properly and be vented in residential housing at the time of sale? So both renters and sale.
You know anything about that, Samantha? I know I've heard that issue discussed, but I don't know if it was about something that exists now or prospective legislation.
Right.
I think that it was if you built your rental property before or after 1978, you're required to have ventilation for the stove if it's gas. But I don't think there are any regulations for currently selling, currently providing that information.
Yeah, I know that. Oh, was someone?
No, go ahead, Samantha.
Go ahead, Samantha.
I was just going to say that there is a coalition called Build Shift, and they are currently working on holistic electrification policies. So not only thinking about the fact that it, reduces carbon, but also thinking about the health benefits of electrification and making sure that as areas transition to be electrified, they aren't priced out, and certain neighborhoods aren't gentrified, and that rents don't increase. So I think that they are still coming up with policy and talking to community-based organizations and landlords to develop this policy. So that's definitely something to look to in the near future. And I can put their website in the chat. Yes.
There are some very complicated equity issues related to electrification because I don't know if you're aware of this, but as more of us who can afford to electrify, there are going to be fewer and fewer people left as gas customers, and they're going to be the ones who are going to have to basically subsidize all of the gas infrastructure, the remaining gas infrastructure, and any upgrades that have to be done on it. So I don't think anybody has the silver bullet of how the electrification is going to be done in an equitable fashion. But there are some complicated issues that are going to have to be overcome.
Right. Well, I love that. Maybe it was Samantha who said give priority to electrifying people who are low-income households first, so they don't have that problem with the stranded assets. That's really a really important point, I think. I would observe that in terms of new construction here in Ashland, our newest affordable housing controlled housing is all electric, because it just now makes more sense. It's you putting in a heat pump, putting in electric is just cheaper. So that's how it's being built. So that's a nice development that it goes in the same direction.
Yeah, if
Let's
any of you have
see.
friends in the home building industry, talk up the fact that it's cheaper to build an all electric home than a dual fuel home, because there's a lot of resistance. Again, it's what people know how to do, build a certain way. But it would be better if the new homes were all electric, certainly. And, Brian Stewart makes the point that even though the new homes are a small percentage of the buildings, when the builders and the pipe fitters get more comfortable with the electric equipment, they're going to have an easier time of recommending it to somebody whose gas furnace dies. Right now, if your gas furnace dies and you just go to any old heating and air conditioning person, what they know is gas furnaces, and they'll probably just bring you another gas furnace. So the getting the new buildings it's not just a drop in the bucket, it's part of the educational process.
Well, and also that new infrastructure, the new furnace, the new water heater, the new stove, it's going to be there for a couple decades.
Yeah.
So better not to put it in to begin with.
Right.
Right. That's all the questions we have right now. If anyone, there is the TikTok link, Chef Jong-kun. I don't know if anyone else has any questions for our panelists.
I want to thank you all for coming and for being part of a group that does such good work in Ashland. It's fabulous to be in touch with you, and we'd like to keep working alongside you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think and thank you, Bob, for helping me out here. And I thought this was a great panel, and I'm going to do a couple really quick things to show. I'm imagining that you're going to all have some questions or want to go do some research. So I'm going to show a couple really quick things. And here I need to ask for your patience in that we're launching a new initiative here in Ashland. We have new websites launching that we're really excited about, but they're still getting there. But I want you to know that this is going to be a major focus here in Ashland, and also give you a little preview about Electrify Now and Brian Stewart, who we keep mentioning, who's going to be your speaker on March 24th. So I'm going to just show that real quick. So I really encourage you to go to this website. There's a lot of great information here. And topics that we discussed tonight. And what's great about this is that it provides a lot of very useful information about how to actually do this, which, we can get it psychologically, and then, how do we actually do this? And it's not as easy as like buying a new television. There's a number of steps involved. So in addition to what Brian is doing, I wanted to let you know, so this is our new organization or our new website, the Ashland Climate Collaborative. Again, it's a work in progress. This is all volunteer at this point. We don't have any funding, but our goal is really to allow our community that we know is very passionate about climate action, very alarmed, very concerned, to come together in a variety of ways to really implement solutions. So there is activism, but it's also about we're just going to get the job done. We feel that sense of urgency, but we feel it on a practical level, like, what are the solutions? We need to, just like we've been interacting with Melanie and folks in Corvallis, Lake Oswego, and other communities, Eugene, we need to make these connections. We need to do them faster than ever, because we know that this is very time-sensitive work. So the Ashland Climate Collaborative is a new organization we formed to build those connections. And on our homepage, because of this program tonight, we did a special link here about Start Learning. So if you want to, Brian's website is excellent, but we've also just built out some resources here. Look at it has a logo. This means it's real. Look at that. Electrify Ashland now. Now it's a real thing. So we give you some video links to some things that we thought were really helpful to just start learning about these products and these technologies. And what it means to electrify. And then I'm going to be really dangerous here. And then I'm going to show you the campaign website, which is very under construction, but I want you to know this is going to be a major focus in helping all of us electrify. But I think the challenge here for us as well is how do we make sure we put the frontline communities first? And I don't think we know the answers to that. And maybe we need more state programs. I know that there have been state programs to try to address the equity issues. But so we're building out this website, and I'll just show you, we're working on several local resources. So our idea is take the resources that Electrify Now is building out on the statewide or just general information, and provide local information for this community. So I'd like, for those of you who are visiting from other communities, I'd like you to kind of consider this as well. Like, what are our city incentives? We're going to start in May. I love this image. In May, we're going to start having monthly homeowner conversations with a technical person, as well as people who have electrified in Ashland, who can say, oh yeah, I heard that too, or oh yeah, that happened to me. This is what I did. So, what other resources, can we provide to you? We're doing a deep dive into the economics of this, using the Ashland City electric rates and our gas rates to say, okay, what is, from the purchase price to operating long-term, what is the financial impact, as well as what's your greenhouse gas impact? And again, we're working very closely with Brian Stewart of Electrify Now in doing that analysis, and it's really, really powerful. Finding a local contractor in this valley, challenging. You might hit some problems. And we're developing a planning guide, and look, there I am, where we tell our real stories, and we want people to tell the stories. So, we're all in this together. This is how, we're going to learn how to solve this problem. It's we're going to make it fun. We're going to do it. And I hope everyone will get on board and contribute your ideas and your enthusiasm, because, we're going to need that.
That's awesome, Lori. I'm so impressed.
Thank you. Well, it's all under construction, Melanie. You got all the great ideas, but you got to make it happen too. So, but we have a great team working on this in shifts right now as we speak, So I want to thank this incredible panel. So excited that you were willing to do this for us tonight. I have deep respect for Physicians for Social Responsibility and the Oregon organization. I just really want to thank you for your leadership and for being here, and for everyone who came from across the state. After this program, I'm going to send you, as soon as I have the recording, I'm going to send the link out to everyone who registered, and you can share it everywhere. We all need to play a part getting this information out. Yeah. And the other thing is, I'm going to send you the information about our next two programs on this trajectory. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. For Melanie, Samantha, and Theodora, for sharing your wisdom with us and for your passion for this topic. And we're going to keep working on this. It's really great.
Thank you all, and thank you, Lori.